Step-by-step demo for a dental clinic. Login. Upon a dental clinic's subscription of one of the Piduay Queuing Service plan, the dental clinic will be granted access to the service, through a specific URL, for a group of authorized users, with their email addresses as usernames to be provided by the clinic, and initial passwords assigned by the Crowd Infonet. Users can change their own individual passwords after logging in. The image shown is the login interface of the service. If the email address and password provided by the user is a correct combination before clicking on the blue Save button to log in, the user will be redirected to the dashboard. Otherwise, error messages will appear to prompt for repeating the login process with correct login credentials. Start a new dental clinic session. Once logged in, the user will be redirected to a dashboard. If this is not the first use of the service, there will be data from the last service session present on the dashboard. If the purpose of the login is not to continue an existing service session but to start a new session with a brand new queue, the user should click on the Reset System submenu item under the Administration section to restart the session. Upon clicking of Reset System, the Piduay Queuing Service will first collect statistics from data of the last session before cleaning up the queue history and all registered patients in the queue. The resulting dashboard will no longer have any record in either the queue history table on the left or active party table on the right of the dashboard. Before being able to manage a queue, the queue has to be created first by registering patients into the queue. The patients can be registered into the queue by a user of the service under a login session as shown in the following section, or by guest self-registration through a kiosk or guest's own mobile device to be discussed later. New dental clinic patient registration. By clicking on the Register New Parties submenu item under the Operations section of the dashboard menu, the user will be presented with a user interface as the following. Upon the clicking of Add Customer button, the following modal pop-up dialog will appear. The user can gather from a patient and input first name or initials, the purpose of the visit, and assign an arbitrary color for registering the patient into the waiting queue. Once all information is provided and the Save button clicked, the newly registered patient will appear in the table with an assigned ID and a color. The user is to provide the patient his or her assigned ID and secret color for later identification purposes. By repeating the process, all patients present on site can be registered into the queue by the user as the following. New patients yet to come can be registered into the queue anytime later by the same approach, or can self-register into the queue through a kiosk or a mobile device. At any rate, with the queue created with some patients in it, the queue is now ready for other operations. And the dashboard will look like the following. Normal dental clinic patient queue advancement. The single-line multiple service point queue managed by the Piduay Queuing Service has all registered new patients initially in waiting status. By advancing the queue, patients with waiting status will be advanced into next status indicating pending receipt of service, and into serving status if being taken for service. There can be multiple patients in waiting status. However, at any given time, there is at most one patient in next status and at most one in serving status. The process of changing the patient ID with serving status is called queue advancement since it indicates a new patient is picked to fulfill the new service opening. The original patient with serving status will have his/her status changed into served, indicating not the latest party taken from the queue for service, but not necessarily implying completion of the actual service. To advance the queue, the user clicks on the Advance Queue submenu item under the Operations section to see the dialog above. There are 3 input fields in this dialog, but only one marked with a red star is a mandatory input. The optional serving location field refers to possibly a specific room in the clinic where the patient is supposed to go to start receiving service. The mandatory second field is a question asking whether there is a good match between the current service opening and the patient with the next status in the queue. There are 3 possible answers: the no-show, the no-good match, and the good match. When the patient is due for service but not present on site, there is a no-show. The user will, in this case, select the no-show option from the drop-down menu to skip the patient and have the service recommend the next one available for service. The status of such a no-show patient will be changed from next to skipped, until it may be reactivated if the patient reappears to reclaim the original position. The process of reclaiming a missed position to be discussed later is called reactivation, which changes the patient's status from skipped to reactivated. When a patient is due for service but the service opening is not a good match for the patient, there is a no good match situation. This can happen if the current service opening is a dentist assistant opening for dental cleaning only and is not qualified to perform a root canal, or if the patient indicated a specific preference for specific dentist but the opening is not from that dentist, etc. In this case, the status of the patient will be changed into priority status to indicate his or her privileged queue position to take any next service opening that fits his or her needs. When neither no show nor no good match occurs, there is a good match. This and only this option will push the patient of next status into the serving status to advance the queue. The optional third field provides an opportunity for any patient with priority status in the queue to either fulfill the current service opening with a serving status immediately when the answer to the second question is not a good match, or to assume the next status if the answer to the second question indicates a good match, and there is another coming service opening after current one a good match to a patient with priority status. When the Save button is clicked after all inputs are provided with intended answers or intentional blank, there are two possible outcomes. If such an answer results in the advancement of the queue with a new patient assuming the serving status, the user will be redirected to the dashboard. If such an answer does not result in a queue advancement, the same dialog will reappear again with updated queue status for all patients in the queue. By repeating the dialog question answering process, if there are matching patients still in the queue, the user should be able to advance the queue eventually. Here, after repeating a few trivial dialog cycles to populate the next and serving statuses of the queue, we have Greg of ID 1 in next status, and the opening is from a dentist who is capable of handling the toothache problem of the patient, and the patient is present on site and is able to pass the secret color identity verification. Greg should be taken to fulfill the service opening. At a click of the Save button after providing input as above, the user is redirected to the dashboard as shown in the following. Note that Greg is assuming the serving status. By right-clicking the current waiting line display submenu under the Operations section of the dashboard as shown on the left side of the following image, a new real-time updated web page to be displayed on a big screen TV in the patient waiting area is shown on the right side of the following image. Here both the patient ID with serving status and ID with next status are shown. The middle yellow band will show the service location of such optional information is provided in the last queue advancement. Dental clinic patients no-show handling. When it is time for Mike with next status to fulfill the current service opening but Mike is somehow not present on site, there is a no-show. To advance the queue, the user should select the no-show answer to the second mandatory question as shown in the following and click the Save button. Mike will be temporarily removed from the queue with the skip status. And the system will automatically pick the top waiting patient in the queue to be the one assuming the next status and ask the same question again. This time, Anna only needs to have a simple cavity filling done, which is a task anyone in the clinic can do. Therefore, the answer to the second question is now yes. There is a good match for the dialog to advance the queue. Since there is a match, the queue will be advanced with Anna assuming the serving position, and the system again automatically picks the top waiting patient from the remaining waiting queue to assume the next status. And the user is redirected to the dashboard as shown in the following. Dental clinic patients reactivation handling. If a previously no-show patient such as Mike reappears to claim the original skipped queue position, and the user decides to reactivate such position, the user can click on the Reactivate Skipped submenu to reach a dialog as the following, and input the ID of the skipped patient in the SID field and click on the Save button to change the status of Mike from skipped to reactivated. Mike will be assigned an equivalent ID of 3, which is the same ID as the patient with a serving status in the queue as a new base to compete for the earliest service in the queue. By default, if everything else going normally in the queue, Mike will receive service a few pre-configured steps with a default value of 2 after John, who has an ID of 4, to get served. More patient registration. At this time, there are 2 new patients registered into the queue through kiosk and mobile device respectively as shown in the following. The web page displayed on kiosks is obtained by the Piduay user from right-clicking the Guest Kiosk Self-Registration submenu under the Operations menu of the Piduay dashboard as shown above. And the page looks like the following. By clicking on the Add Customer button, a pop-up dialog will appear to collect a new party information to be appended to the waiting queue. Let's say Jane at this junction just self-registered on a kiosk by filling out the following information in the dialog and clicking on the Add button to successfully add herself into the queue. As shown in the following, Jane can verify her success by seeing her as the latest record added on top to the waiting list shown in the bottom table of the kiosk self-registration page. By scanning the QR code on top of the self-registration page on the kiosk with one's own mobile device and open the URL obtained with a web browser on the mobile device, a guest can self-register at his or her own mobile device instead to avoid touching the kiosk as a publicly shared object to reduce health risks. As shown in the following, the looks and function of such page is almost identical to the page for kiosks, except without the QR code on page top. Let's say Ted went through a self-registration process through his mobile device successfully. At its completion, the Piduay user will be able to see the following dashboard contents after refreshing the dashboard page. Dental clinic patients no match handling. When there is a new service opening, and John is due for the service, if the clinic finds the opening is from a dental assistant who cannot handle crown installation required by the patient as indicated in the notes of John's record, the user will have to answer no. There is not a good match to the second question of queue advancement dialog before clicking the Save button as shown in the following. The dialog will reappear with the status of John changed from Next to Priority, and the status of Mike is changed from Reactivated to Next. This time the dental assistant is capable of providing the regular cleaning service Mike needs, hence there is a match. By answering question 2 accordingly, and clicking on Save, the queue is once again advanced and the user is back to the dashboard. Now one can see from the right table of the dashboard that Mike has a serving status, and John has a priority status. Dental clinic patients queue advancement with priority. Sometimes during queue advancement, there are situations when the next patient Jane is not a good match to the current service opening, but a priority patient John is. The following dialog shows the corresponding input for the queue advancement dialog. Upon submitting such dialog, the queue will be advanced with John taking the serving status and Jane the priority status as shown in the following dashboard. The real-time updated big screen TV will be showing the following updated contents and issuing a short bell sound whenever there is a queue advancement, namely, whenever the ID number for serving status is changed. Note that the service location room 5 is shown in the yellow middle band this time. Dental clinic patient's assignment correction or modification. When a patient already under service with the served status is advised by the clinic that a related procedure should be done by other practitioners in the same session at the completion of the previous service, such patient should be put back to the queue with priority status. To achieve this, the user clicks on the correct assignment submenu to get the following dialog, and picks an ID with served status from the right table, say Greg of ID 1, to be the input for party ID field on the left form, and clicks Save. The user will now be back to the dashboard showing Greg with priority status. However, the notes for Greg is probably incorrect and should be updated. At this juncture, it is found that Jane as one of the ID with priority status is not on site. Since with Jane's current queue status, it can be her turn to get served anytime soon. It seems the right time to send an SMS reminder to Jane for her to come back on site in time for the service. To send a SMS reminder to Jane, the user simply clicks on the green button at the right end of Jane's record in the right table of the dashboard to get the following confirmation pop-up dialog, and clicks on the SMS button to send the SMS message if the SMS number looks OK. The user will be back to the dashboard after sending an SMS or closing the dialog manually without sending one. To update the notes field for Greg, the user clicks on the Register New Parties submenu to get to the following editable table, and click on the edit icon on the row of Greg's record to modify the notes into root canal. The following pop-up dialog will show up with only editable fields for the party. Revise the contents of the notes from toothache to root canal and click Save to complete the revision. At the completion of such revision, the revised notes contents will appear in Greg's record in the page table as shown in the following. Similarly, the revision can also be visible from the dashboard as shown in the following. Dental clinic patients guest registration check online. For guests making remote registration through office clerks help by phone calls, besides providing to remote guests the system-assigned ID and secret color for later verification purposes, the user can provide an additional URL to the remote guest for online checking of queue registration status. The URL to be provided to remote guests can be obtained from right-clicking the Guest Registration Check submenu item as shown in the following. The URL does not require guests to log in. The guest can search his or her initial or first name provided in the table to verify the successful completion of queue registration. Dental Clinic Queuing Service Users Management of User Information. The Manage User Info submenu item under the Administration section of the dashboard can be used to change the email address and password of an individual user. The dialog is pretty simple and self-explanatory as the following. Dental Clinic Session Statistics Export. To obtain session statistical information for offline analysis, the user can click on the Export Session Statistics submenu item under the Administration section to download a CSV file by your browser. The file name is in the pattern of db_export_yy_mm_dd.csv, where YYYY, mm, and dd are numerical calendar year, month, and date of the download date, respectively in Los Angeles local time. For more details about the contents of this file, the reader is referred to the Quick Start Guide accessible from the dashboard once you have demo or subscription access to the service. Deactivate a queue position of a dental clinic patient. In a situation when a patient, Jane, has to abandon her position in a queue and makes such intent known to the user has the option to take the patient out of the waiting queue by deactivating the patient. To do this, the user just has to click on the Deactivate Waiting submenu item under the Operations section of the dashboard to reach the following dialog. Identify the ID as 5 of the queue abandoning patient Jane from the right table, and specify such ID as 5 into the WID input field on the left form and click Save. The user will be redirected to the dashboard. The removed patient Jane will have skipped status and will no longer be shown in the right table of the dashboard. SMS Third-Party Service Integration Configuration. Optional integration with a third-party SMS service provider can be achieved at any time after service subscription, by configuring a record in a system table with all configuration parameters from the third-party provider saved in respective record fields. Currently, integration is implemented with D7 Networks as the only acceptable SMS service provider. Before attempting to configure your SMS service integration, a business account is to be established with the D7 Networks first so as to make configuration integration parameters available. D7 Networks is not in any way affiliated with us, but is considered a pretty reliable and cost-effective SMS provider of choice. To start the SMS integration configuration, please click on the Manage SMS Settings submenu under the Administration section, and click on the Add SMS Config button to create a new record. A pop-up dialog will show up as the following. Provide all the integration configuration parameters obtained from your third-party SMS service provider, and click on the blue button to save the record and complete the configuration. Once completed, the green button on the right of each customer record on the dashboard page will be able to send an SMS reminder message to the individual customer once clicked, providing a valid SMS number was provided by the customer at the time of the waiting queue registration.